because of what happened. And so what you're seeing, what you're hearing is, again, trauma is wounding. It hurts. It's defeating. And again, as what Yelan did, it was a physical wound, it's a psychic wound, it's excruciating pain, and at the same time, emotionally wounding because of the shame that his treatment did to these soldiers. Now, you guys probably heard of what we call talk therapy. And I'm not sure if you are familiar of the opposite of what Yelan did, who the opposite or the counterpart of Yelan was, his name is W.H. Rivers, and he's a physician. And he did the opposite of what Yelan did. Rather than being shamed, the veteran and the soldier was treated with dignity and respect. Rather than being silenced, soldiers were encouraged to write and talk freely about the terrors of war. One of the soldiers said, Sassoon, he responded with gratitude. He made me feel safe at once and seemed to know all about me. I would give a lot for a few gramophone records of my talks with Rivers. All that matters is my remembrance of the great and good man who gave me his friendship and guidance. And that is the origin or the start of the talking cure. And so trauma in the past were shamed and were feared. And I think we need to understand that that's not how we treat trauma. We treat trauma with being able to recognize it. We also need to treat trauma knowing that people can be heard, can be seen, can be felt, can be understood. And what we've experienced as world, and I'm not only talking about United States, but the Philippines, what I've heard from our dean, that a lot of people had experienced trauma that can be in the form of depression and anxiety because of COVID. So we are dealing with collective trauma, not only as a nation, but as a whole world. And the one way, and maybe few ways that we can treat trauma and heal trauma is through being compassionate to one another. And we're gonna get there. So, few more explanation of trauma. It is a painful disruption. It's a loss of assurance that the world is a safe place. Don't we feel that way right now? I do. We feel like it's a never-ending, hopeless journey. Day after day, you hear people dying. You hear your family, your members getting sicker and sicker with no help or with no relief. And there you are experiencing and witnessing that they're just like withering like dry flowers. And so it is traumatic. It is traumatic. That sense of helplessness and hopelessness. And there's also that definition of overwhelming. It is an overwhelming capacity to cope, which means we're running on empty. We have nothing left to give. And all what's left in us are the activation of the traumatic stress response. And those are the flock, the flight, the freeze, and the submit. I would like to reiterate this really accurate definition of trauma. All of these are pretty accurate. It's overwhelming, and the individual experiences a threat to life, bodily integrity, and sanity. So, Bessel van der Kolk, who is a neuroscientist and a world-renowned trauma expert, shared that trauma memories are not nicely and neatly stored in one part of the brain. It's fragmented. It goes all over. It's like a filing cabinet when somebody experienced trauma, either from COVID or something historical, like child abuse, unresolved child abuse and neglect. Imagining your mind and brain like a filing cabinet with all the letters scrambled from A, Z, M, D, B. That's what trauma is. That's what fragmentation means. It's all over. And most of the time, trauma memories are connected, are actually stored in the limbic part of our system, all emotions but no words. All pictures, implicit memories in the limbic system, and also in the lower part of the brain, which is responsible for the heart palpitation, the heart rate, the blood, and at the same time, it is also responsible for the fight and flight activation. So again, trauma, I tell people when I do training, trauma memories, and when somebody experienced trauma, which I am assuming we all have experienced trauma. For me, I did, and I still do, with regard to what's going on here, the stress about COVID. It's rampant here in the United States as well. It's fragmented, and that's why it is seen and it's experienced through depression and anxiety, and sometimes that overwhelming or hyperactivity, or what we call, poor concentration and inattention. So we have to look at trauma as like an umbrella of what's going on in our system. We have to look at an individual that we need to hear their stories, not just one part of their stories. It's emotionally painful. It's overwhelming. It leaves, is what I said, it leaves person feeling powerless. And that's another definition of trauma. I love this. This is a very good definition too, that trauma is when people live with more fear than hope. And what is post-traumatic growth? I'm going to be shifting it from trauma to post-traumatic growth. Post-traumatic growth is the opposite of this, which means people live more in hope than fear, which we're going to get to it in a bit. So trauma, and again, I hope that you use this trauma context in your application and in your work with people dealing with historical trauma, and also with the COVID-19 in your country. So we all know that trauma can occur and can start in a single event. An example of that may be a car accident. It can be traumatic to one person, but not necessarily this person can develop PTSD. When a person, I'll give you one example. Someone experienced PTSD when their resources are not available, or their resources are the cause of their danger. So when someone experiences a single event trauma, and it can be a car accident or somebody, a child got bitten by a dog, that's traumatic, but not necessarily long lasting. It can be what we call an acute stress disorder. Or it doesn't have to be a disorder. It can be just a traumatic symptoms, but it can go away. However, when somebody experiences something like that, but they come home and they're getting abused, or something happened to them over and over, that can be a risk of post-traumatic stress disorder, and most of the time it can be chronic. So trauma can be a single event, is what I said, a connected series of events, the never-ending dealings and the battles that we struggle, the struggles that we are experiencing with this COVID-19. We don't know. Hindi natin alam kung kailan ito matatapos. Hindi natin alam kung is the vaccination very effective. We don't know. It's nonstop. Every day we see somebody is suffering. And then we have to deal with also the losses that we have and the past stuff that we experience, maybe unresolved trauma. It's chronic, it's lasting stress, and oftentimes, it is sad, trauma is underreported and underdiagnosed. You notice that when you're working with kids, oftentimes they get, if we don't know the story, and that's why we cannot just look at a person in one area. We need to know the story. We need to know the story. You will see this, let's say, elementary children, high school, middle school kids, and one, you will deal with ADHD perhaps, or oppositional defiance. But do we ever think about why are they behaving that way? Why was there a change in their system, in their state? Or do we only focus on one thing and diagnose it with this specific diagnosis and then medicate them? This is the challenge I want each one of you to think about. Because in trauma, again, in a trauma-informed lens, we have to remember that it is not what is wrong with you, it is what happened to you. We need to know the story of the people, of the person that we work with, regardless of their age. And this is what I do. This is my standard protocol as a clinician. I hear the story. And not only the present day story, but I also hear and listen to what happened to them growing up. That is, I believe, a very ethical, clinical, sound way of doing treatment. So again, trauma, oftentimes, and I'm not only talking about United States, but I also believe that trauma is underreported and underdiagnosed in many areas of the world. I really think that trauma before the pandemic, right? Even before the pandemic, the SARS, all that stuff, trauma is the silent epidemic. And that is something that we have been dealing through generations and generations. And they come and go, and they come back because trauma is generational. That's something that our forefathers learned, and then they kept on continuing to transfer or to share it with the next generation. So again, one of the things I wanted to share with you is trauma is a silent epidemic that we've been dealing with many, many, many years ago. So what are some of the effects of profound and chronic trauma? I don't know how long this pandemic is going to last, but I do believe that we are into this point where we are all dealing with chronic trauma symptoms. But I'm not only talking about the pandemic here, I'm also talking about the issue of abuse and neglect, unresolved abuse and neglect. The more we continue to experience this, the more the sense of self is getting lost. And what I mean by that is the person who experienced chronic unresolved trauma starts to doubt, starts to feel insecure, and starts to feel, actually not start, I'm sorry about that, but they continually feel doubt, mistrust, fear, and insecurity. Who am I? What is my place in this world? Who is God? Is there God? What is my purpose? What is my meaning? And so this is profound. We need to understand that chronic trauma, regardless of the situation that people deal with, whether it's abuse, neglect, pandemic, etc., people start to lose themselves. The other one is regulation. Regulation is a common word now. But I would like to, my simplest term there is people lost the sense of internal thermometer. Each one of us, just like our homes, we have thermometer. Kind of like, you use it, yung body thermometer when you get sick. We all have a built-in regulation. That's the internal thermometer in our system. We lost the ability to regulate ourselves. Small annoyance can turn into a very extreme, overwhelming hyperarousal reaction from someone who's experienced trauma. So pay attention to that. The next one is sensory integration. This is what I call how you see the world. So that's the output. That's how you see the world. And the other one is giving back what how you see the world and what the world see about you. That's the input and the output. What you're taking in, and what you're taking out. And that comprises the sense of smell, the sense of touch, the sense of seeing, the visual, and what you hear. When somebody experiences chronic trauma, and again, regardless of the event, they have a difficult time experiencing the world within and outside. They don't know their place, and that's when some people start to feel numb. They start to dissociate. It's either they want more from others, or they get so overwhelmed that they don't know what to do. And so those are the three that I find in my practice, I see and experience people suffer from. The loss of self, sense of self, the dysregulation, and the inability to integrate what's about you and what you see outside the world. Dr. Vincent Felitti, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with this, and I think this is something so important, not only here in the United States, but I think this is something you can use globally. Dr. Vincent Felitti did a study from 1995 to 1997 about the history of sexual abuse. So he was running an obesity clinic through Kaiser Permanente. And he was treating this, so he was treating this women, and the way he's treating is helping them they're dealing with obesity. All these women are struggling with poor diet. Their weight is skyrocketing. They're obese. So the purpose of that clinic is to help these women come back or get back to their health and wellness. And he specifically focused on one of his clients who's morbidly obese, and she was she was following the program. She was doing really, really well. And she was working hard. So she was actually losing weight. She's eating healthy. She's sleeping well. She's doing good. She's doing really, really good. And then she was gone for a while, and next thing you know, she came back. And she came back, and Dr. Felitti saw her, and he was very shocked because he didn't have to weigh her, but he noticed that her weight had increased, actually doubled. Her weight doubled compared to the first time she came in. And she told him a very sad story. She shared that when she came back to work, and there was this young guy who started to take notice of her. I think he was one of her co-worker. Took notice of her and actually asked her for a date. It freaked the heck out of this woman. It scared her. And so the way she handled her fear was actually going back home, opening her fridge, and stuff food in her mouth. So she stuffed herself again. She was very afraid. And so when Dr. Felitti asked her why, she told him that she had to do it because she was so afraid of getting sexually abused again. She was so afraid to be sexually abused again, the way that her grandpa abused her. So the way she's protecting herself was to actually look unattractive, to gain that weight so nobody hurt her anymore. At one point, around that year, I think maybe a few years after that, that woman died. And so that's when Dr. Felitti recognized the powerful impact of the childhood experience, the adverse childhood experience. And him and Kaiser Permanente really took this seriously. And this is shocking. This is very shocking. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but they identified 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, they identified 10 childhood adversities. And as what you see, emotional abuse, these are not only applicable to United States, right? We also, as a nation, marami din tayong mga cases na ganito. Emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, mother treated violently, which can probably be considered domestic violence, household substance abuse, meth, alcoholism, mental illness in household, parental separation or divorce, criminal household member living in home, emotional neglect, and physical neglect. So they identified all these adverse childhood experience, and I'm going to show you in a few seconds that when they found that the higher the score of the A's, the adverse childhood experience, the higher the score of A's, the risk for health problems increase. So there's a strong link between those adverse childhood experience and all these physical illnesses, risky health behaviors, chronic health conditions, low life potentials, and even early death. I want to share with you guys something about my previous client, because I'm also I'm a clinician. I like to dig in. I just don't do admin work all the time. So my client recently, actually, a few months ago, I had a client that committed suicide. this extreme and intense unresolved issues that never were dealt until now, that that he's trying to heal slowly, and he could not handle that. And they're saying that a lot of times when people that experience all those adverse childhood experience unresolved, they deal with a lot of physical chronic health conditions like diabetes and heart attack. So something to think about when you are doing your assessment. Learn about the client, know their stories, and please write this down. Look at adverse child experience, or ACE. Probably you can Google it, ace.org. There's a form you can use when sometimes bring with clients, and to you as well. I filled out that ACE. Can I give it and then don't understand it personally? So they're saying again, above 6 of that adverse childhood experience has 15% or greater chance to suffer from any of the leading causes of death, like heart disease, and including early death, and not to mention, and don't forget suicide. So we all know some of the sources of trauma, but I would like to point this out to people that are not in the psychology world. Neglect, and what I'm talking about is not only physical neglect, but emotional neglect. Domestic abuse usually happens between a partner, boyfriend, girlfriend, or husband and wife. Sexual abuse, physical abuse, bullying and social media, migration and refugee status, separation, military deployments, war, accidents, disasters, which we are dealing with right now, and death and homicides. All of these overwhelm someone's capacity to cope. All of these situations activate the stress response, the flock, the flight, the freeze, the submit, because it's very, very stressful. It's beyond somebody's capacity to handle. We all know that trauma affects these main systems. The brain, as much as we want to take it for granted, the brain is strong, and at the same time, it is the most delicate and sensitive part of our bodies, and the nervous system. So the brain holds the emotions, the memories, the complex reasoning and regulation. God has given us a gift. The brain is that gift. This is higher power than, this is beyond the animal kingdom, right? This is systems of meaning, this is regulation, this is complex thinking. And our nervous system, which is responsible for controlling and regulating our system, our heart rate, and it's communicating with all the other systems of the body. So these are very much affected by trauma. And you probably all know, most of you all know, the triune brain. One mind, three brains. And oftentimes, we look at it in the brain state. It starts with the brain stem. It's a bottom up approach. It doesn't go top down. It starts always with the bottom up. Brain stem is responsible for survival and maintenance. It's responsible for the basic needs, the safety, in avoiding harm. This is the one that holds the fight and flight, freeze and submit responses. The job of the brainstem is to activate those systems to keep you back, to get you back in homeostasis, to get you back in stability. The second up is the limbic. Limbic is where attachment is formed. This is the feelings and the memory formation. It's meeting, it's satisfying, it's satisfaction in approaching rewards. Oftentimes, not oftentimes, limbic does not have the words, but has the memories. Remember what I was telling you about the file cabinet? That's where the fragmentation is, with no words. It's all memories, pictures, images. Limbic holds that. And then the third one up is the cortex, which is the higher mental functioning, basic needs of that it holds its connection and attachment to others. In trauma treatment, oftentimes, especially from people that experience chronic abuse and neglect, we do not start on the cortex. And what that looks like is talk therapy. I had many failures in my practice for so many years, believing that talk therapy would be the solution for trauma healing. I was so wrong, until science shared with us that we often need to start with the bottom-up approach, calming the brain system, the limbic, and once they are calm, using pattern, repetitive, rhythmic activities and movement, then you can activate the cortex. So powerful. I wanted you guys to remember this because we're going to come back here. This is. I look at this as a treatment planning. So we all know the functions of the stress response, and again, they are in